Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sorry I'm a Bitch, the podcast for anyone who's ever been called a bitch. Hosted by Kaylee Ellis and produced by me, Hannah Laree. It's officially season 2. Can you believe it? This week we are revisiting our most popular episode, Food Noise.
We have Georgie. She has taken GLP-1 medications, and so far she has lost 70 pounds. We also have Molly Ellis, who is my sister-in-law, and she is a dietitian.
So let's dive into some of our questions. Molly is our first guest. Kaylee, take it away.
What is your name, title, and career experience?
So you guys said my name is Molly Ellis. So I am a registered dietitian, and I have been a registered dietitian for about 5.5 years now. I've worked in a lot of different settings. I started out inpatient, so like in hospitals. I worked in ICUs, the neonatal ICU, medical surgical units, women's health units. So just kind of floated around. And now currently for the last about 2.5 years, I have worked in the outpatient setting, doing things like integrative and functional nutrition, eating disorders, teaching cooking classes, and then just general nutrition visits. So whatever people are interested in learning about or improving on, I can do most of it.
And then what are your degrees, certifications, accolades? Like, what do you need to do to become a dietitian?
To become a dietitian, it has changed since I did it. When I went through the education, you had to have a bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics, and then you had to do a internship. So it is essentially you need 1,200 supervised practice hours in kind of the various roles a dietitian can take on. After you get your bachelor's degree, you then applied to these very competitive internships, where you would then go through different rotations is what we call them. So there's a clinical rotation where you get hospital and clinic experience. There's a food service rotation where you can learn about school food service, hospital food service. And then there's also a community aspect as well. So say working for a food pantry, the Women, Infant, and Children's Program, or WIC. And then there's also some programs that offer kind of elective rotations in your area of interest. So like me personally, I did a worksite corporate wellness type rotation as well. And then from there, once you get those supervised practice hours, you can then sit for the RD exam. And you pass that, you become a dietitian. And then from there, right, you can kind of take it anywhere. There's various certifications you can go for. So my own personal journey, I went to UW-Madison for my undergraduate degree in dietetics. And then I went to Mount Mary University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for my internship, and then took my RD exam from there. I also have the Wisconsin state certification, so I can practice in Wisconsin. And then this past fall, I also became a certified integrative and functional nutrition certified practitioner. So that's kind of one of those additional credentials you can get. Now, presently, anybody who wants to become a dietitian does have to have their master's degree before they even sit for the exam. So that's kind of the one change.
Lucky for you.
Agreed.
Yeah. What made you want to become a dietitian?
So I had to really think on this one because I think my desire to be a dietitian has kind of changed over the years. What it started, I think it was when I was in high school. I went on my own kind of personal wellness journey where I kind of realized as I was going through the grades that I was just less healthy, right? I didn't have an interest in healthy eating. I wasn't engaged in sports. And I just didn't really feel great. And I kind of just came to this realization. I think I was trying on my summer clothes and I was like, none of these fit. And I know exactly why. And so I just started learning about exercise and nutrition, and I found it really interesting. I kind of, as most people do, right? There's this pendulum where you go from not being healthy to then all of a sudden you swing to being way too concerned about healthy. And of course I went through that, whole thing. But in that process, right, I had to decide what I wanted to do for school. And so initially it was going to be nursing, like most, a lot of high school girls. That's a, common choice, I think. But I just didn't really feel right. And so I started looking at other options, and I didn't even know dietitians existed. I had no idea that was a career option. But when I learned about being a dietitian, I was like, well, this is exactly what, my skills and my interests, that's exactly where it lies. And so I course corrected and decided to study dietetics instead.
Let's hop into weight loss. What are some common misconceptions about weight loss?
So I came up with 3 kind of big things that I see. Probably the biggest misconception is that weight loss requires this like immense amount of misery and suffering through dietary changes, exercise. And while I think that it's kind of inevitable that there will probably be periods of it being hard, and any sort of habit change is hard, I think that if a person is really miserable the whole time, that's probably a sign that, you need to take a step back and kind of reevaluate things. So that's the biggest thing I see, right? Is people are kind of expecting to suffer, and they're okay with it. And I try to work on that with people. The next thing I see is that weight loss should happen quickly. And if it's not, then those efforts aren't working, right? And we need to change things immediately. And for most folks that I have seen that have obesity that end up losing the weight and keeping it off, it is a multi-year process. Like, it is slow, and it is supposed to be slow. And that is something that I reassure people with all the time. And then the third thing is that weight loss is just eating less and moving more. And I think that there are so many more aspects to weight loss. Like, is the bottom line, can we summarize it and simplify it to that? Maybe, sure. I think that's a little bit of an outdated kind of saying or approach to it. Because, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, there's so many more things that go into it that need to be addressed. So it's a complex thing.
That's so interesting that you mentioned about common misconception is that it's very hard. I totally experienced that with my weight loss, because before I think I was just really overthinking it. So I did the intermittent fasting, and I would literally starve myself for one day because I would do the whole 24-hour thing. And then I got on the GLP-1s, and I realized like starving yourself is not, you can't lose weight and starve yourself and keep that weight off and have that as a lifestyle change. So moving into GLP-1 medications, how do they work in the context of weight loss?
Yeah, they're a really interesting medication. They're relatively new. I just learned this as I was kind of looking deeper into them with this question. They were only kind of created in the 1990s, which, like, in the context of medicine is a pretty new medication. They were originally created for type 2 diabetes. And then, as with most medications, as practitioners start to use them, they discover like, oh, these have weird side effects, things that we didn't expect to see. And weight loss is one of them. So basically, a GLP-1 medication, so GLP stands for glucagon-like peptide, which is a hormone that naturally is made in the body. Glucagon-like peptide is made in the small intestine, and it works in a couple ways in the body. So one thing is that it triggers insulin release in response to a meal that has carbohydrates. And so insulin is what tells your cells to let sugar into them. So it brings sugar from the bloodstream into cells, where then it can be delivered throughout the body and used for fuel. Another thing that the GLP-1 does is that it blocks glucagon secretion. And glucagon is a hormone that raises blood sugar levels as needed. So, maybe you're a couple hours from a meal and your body needs a little bit more energy. It might release glucagon to then help bring up blood sugar levels and keep that energy level stable in the body. The GLP also then prevents additional glucose from entering the bloodstream. Glucagon-like peptide and glucagon kind of act against each other. So where glucagon raises blood sugar, glucagon-like peptide says we don't need blood sugar, we're good. And then GLP-1 also slows gastric emptying. So that means that there's kind of, as our food enters our stomach, it's churned around, it's, mixed with the acid, it's broken down, and then it is released into the small intestine to continue with, where we absorb nutrients. The longer that food stays in the stomach, of course, the longer that feeling of fullness is going to be there. So that GLP-1 hormone slows down gastric emptying, which means that your food's going to stay in your stomach a little bit longer. And because of this, when that food is released slower, it also slows that release of sugar into the bloodstream. So it keeps your blood sugar from spiking really quickly after a meal. And then GLP-1 also increases how full you feel after eating by communicating with the brain with a bunch of hormonal processes that are like way beyond my knowledge. So then the GLP-1 medication. So it's also referred to as a GLP-1 agonist. So what it does is it is the kind of man-made version of GLP, and it binds to the same receptors in the body as that GLP-1 in the body does. So what that does is it acts in the same way, and then it also amplifies the effects. So the higher the dose of GLP-1 medication, of course, the bigger the effects are going to be. So because of this, right, the body, it has more GLP, so it's going to produce and respond to insulin more effectively. Those fullness cues are going to be there because it's communicating with your brain better that, yeah, we're good, we're full. And it's also keeping that fullness a little bit more present after a meal because the food is staying in the stomach longer. And all of those things, of course, are what helps it lead to weight loss, right? Because those feelings of fullness are there. That kind of hunger that might creep in takes a little bit longer. So, of course, that helps with weight loss immensely.
Wow. I was on those drugs for 8 months and I did not know.
I have a quick question kind of playing off of that. Because our body produces these hormones, let's say we have someone who is struggling with obesity and someone who doesn't. Is the person who doesn't struggle with obesity, are those hormones just naturally more present than it, or like how does that work in natural occurring situations?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something I don't think I quite understand fully. Hormones and weight, kind of just weight management in the body, it's so complex. But there are some kind of things with hormones, if there's insulin resistance present, that's going to impact your hunger cues, what you're craving, just the way that your body stores versus releases fat. And I think, folks that like with PCOS, for example, right, where that insulin resistance is like very present, that is one of the main things that makes weight loss so difficult. It's because if insulin resistance is present, there's always insulin, in the bloodstream, the body's not responding to it. And if insulin's present, it's much harder to be in a fat loss mode in the body because insulin is a storage hormone.
There's also the gut-brain interaction. So one of the things that I noticed when I was on the GLP-1s is when you're eating and you feel full, you stop eating. Whereas like I don't feel that. So I have to now, I've been off the medications for almost 2 years. I have to actually like physically stop myself from eating. My body doesn't do that for me. And then if I overeat, my brain and stomach don't talk to each other until like after the meal at some point, and then I'm just like miserable and I hurt because I completely overate. So that's one thing that I did not know I had until I started taking the medication, and my brain and my gut were actually talking to each other. And I was like, oh, cool, I'm done eating. And then I was like, well, no wonder people can stay thin if they have that because they're just like not overeating.
Yeah, Kaylee, I think that's a really good point. Is there's that dysregulation is very present, and that's something that I hear a lot of people say when they start a GLP-1 is like, oh, now I know what you were saying when you were talking about those fullness cues. I've never really understood what that meant before. And it's like just this immense sense of relief to like actually be able to connect with those cues.
You just mentioned patients and putting them on this medication. What do you have steps that you take before you put patients on this medication, or is it patient by patient and you go, okay, this patient needs to just go on to the GLP-1 medications before trying anything else, or what's that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think every dietitian is going to have a different answer to this. When I usually recommend a GLP-1 is for patients, and it's a little bit different in my role just because when I see patients, it's usually they've already worked with other dietitians, and then they come see me with a little bit more complex clinical picture just because of that integrative and functional role. I look a little bit more at the whole person. So when I see them, the point when I recommend a GLP-1 is if somebody has been diligently working at weight loss, they've got the exercise, they're really trying with the eating habits. Maybe they're trying and not succeeding, but like the effort is there and the not succeeding is, kind of because of what we've talked about with that dysregulation. And they're also working on, other aspects of improving their health as well, maybe sleeping better, working on their mental health, right? But the effort and the results are not congruent. That's usually where I say, have you thought about a weight loss medication? Usually people have already thought about it, and they're usually the ones to bring it up. And I have no problem saying, I think there's a couple things that we need to work on before I'd feel comfortable with that. Like, kind of like you were talking about, Kaylee, with like eating regularly, right? If somebody is kind of in the throes of restriction and, just kind of trying not to eat very much, something I commonly see is then people don't have those big hunger cues. And so then they think, great, I'm not hungry, I don't have to eat. And so I really like to make sure somebody is in a spot where they are prepared to kind of be there for their body while they're experiencing these changes, and they can hold themselves accountable for eating regularly, eating balanced meals, right? Getting those nutrients they need while their body adjusts to the medication. So that's usually those things that need to be in place before I feel comfortable recommending it. When somebody is in that place, I will recommend to their primary care provider that, this patient is interested. I think it's appropriate. Please evaluate and advise as indicated, because it is outside of a dietitian's scope of practice to actually prescribe a GLP-1 or any weight loss medication. But we are certainly part of the interdisciplinary team that helps with that evaluation.
So one of the things that Georgie mentioned was, if you're going to go on a weight loss journey,
talk to a mental health professional. I think that there's a lot of a mental battle that comes with this, and there could also be more going on. And most of the time there is a hormone imbalance, or, getting testing done to make sure that this is the right thing. And there are other ways to lose weight. There are. And the truth is, some people who are really, really overweight, they try this med and it doesn't work. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
What I see is that most people that are dealing with obesity have been dealing with it for a long time, if not their whole life, right? Like, there are so many people that when I say, how long have you been working on weight loss? And they say, oh, forever.
I've been overweight my entire menstruating life, basically. So I've always been a big girl, always. I mean, I'm 5'10", like I'm very tall. I've never been thin.
It goes so deep. Some things that come to mind, there's social things, right? So the fear of being seen in public in a larger body and the judgment that comes with it, right? Things like, I don't want to go to the grocery store because people look at my cart and they are judging me for what I'm buying. People don't, going to the gym can be scary because, again, being in that larger body, what are people thinking? I don't want to look stupid. I don't, it's uncomfortable. Social situations, right? And again, it's that weight bias that just kind of exists in our society that I think sits so heavily and prevents people with obesity from feeling like they can just go out and exist comfortably.
People like to shit on fat people. If you lose weight too fast, oh my God, don't lose weight too fast. If you did it too slow, you're not exercising and doing this. Like, people care so much about it. And I'm like, but you've never had to do what I'm doing.
And so that really decreases the access that people end up having to things like going to the gym and grocery shopping, getting help from their medical providers, right? Like, that weight bias is real in healthcare. And I think a lot of healthcare organizations are working to address weight bias, but, on a provider to provider basis, it's still there, right? Where somebody living in a larger body might go to the doctor for one issue and they're leaving with the recommendation of, well, you should lose weight and then we'll talk, right? When it's, that person didn't go to the doctor to be about their weight. They went because they're having a mental health issue, right? And it's like, cool, great, thanks. I didn't know I was living in a larger body and should lose weight. Like, people have thought about it already. So I think to kind of think big picture, there's a lot of shame. I think there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And that stuff can really be a huge barrier to then asking for help, which then kind of just furthers that cycle of obesity.
That was the biggest thing, like, in my recovery. What was the most difficult? Like, having all this food noise and just thinking about food all the fucking time. And I was like, I'm not starving myself anymore, but why am I so worried about food still? I'm not binging all the time, but why am I still freaking out about food all the time? I still, because I'm just also very anxious. I have terrible anxiety. And I still have to look at the menu before I go to every single restaurant. I can't just go to the restaurant and like look at the menu and decide.
Having a therapist on board during that journey is really, really important, both to address like how do you deal with society, right, in our diet culture that is still so present, and how do you work to kind of improve the internal environment as well that, however that's impacting lifestyle choices.
I know that when I went to start my weight loss journey, I had worked with a provider who basically was like work out, eat right type thing. I did that for 6 months and I kind of, I lost 10 pounds and then I kind of slowly started gaining a little bit back. And then, but it kept kind of losing and gaining the same 10 pounds over and over and over again. And then I actually found a nurse practitioner who was open and like, hey, yeah, you have PCOS. And then we tailored what my calories needed to be. And it was like a lot lower than the other person had told me. So can you kind of talk about like how you tailor dietary recommendations for patients with different lifestyle needs and preferences? I don't know if you have any patients that are like maybe bound to a wheelchair or maybe don't have the mobility.
There's a lot of things to take into account. And I always like to remind people that eating healthy can look a lot of different ways. If somebody wants to learn to cook, we start there. A lot of people have literally zero interest in cooking. They're like, I don't like cooking. It takes too much time. It's not fun. So then we talk about, okay, great. Like you don't have to cook to eat healthy. Let's figure out what you are willing to do and look at how you can adjust your choices based on what, maybe you don't like to cook, but you can throw together a sandwich or a wrap. Or we can put together, like I call them adult Lunchables, where it's like just grab a protein source, grab a carb source, grab some veggies, like throw it on a plate, you're done. It's great. I also will talk through, people that maybe are in a wheelchair, right? Or have chronic pain that prevents them from being able to stand in the kitchen or have that mobility. How do we break down maybe meal prepping so that you only have to stand for 10 minutes at a time and don't have to do it every day? Or what can we look for in the grocery store that's going to make food prep easier, right? Can we look at pre-cut veggies? Can we look at frozen and canned things? Can you look at meal delivery services? Things like that. Socioeconomic status is huge, right? If somebody can't afford to go buy fresh produce or they can't drive somewhere, then we also have to consider, right? What are the changes that we can make within the limitations that you have? And I think there's also an open and honest conversation that has to happen around, what is realistic with someone's abilities, with someone's socioeconomic status, with someone's interest in the whole thing in general, and kind of improve things to the extent that is realistic for each person. With things like the food pantry or like, limited access to food, we'll often talk about like, well, what do you get from the food pantry? Do you grocery shop outside of that? And how can we kind of put those things together in a way that still resembles a nice balanced meal that's going to keep you full? So lots of things like that. And yeah, it definitely varies from person to person and food preferences and all that kind of stuff. No one teaches anybody how to eat. So then we leave school and and that's, with any life skill, right? It's just like, we're not taught how to do our taxes or how to grocery shop or any of these things. And so, yeah, then we're told to eat healthy and nobody actually knows what that looks like. How do you build a meal that's going to give you energy, be satiating, keep you full for a while, and give your body the nutrients it needs? That's something that I think I talk about with 90% of the people that I see.
My next question is actually the one I think I'm most interested in, just because it kind of like feels I think we can talk about it in like a gossipy way and not like a shamey way, but what's your least favorite diet? I know that we've got a lot of, like, when I was trying to lose weight, I was on TikTok and there was so many different diets and I would try all of them. And it's like, what's the one where you see people talk about and you're like, no?
Yeah, I think most recently it's been the carnivore diet where I'm just like, oh God.
Wait, what's this? I haven't heard this.
The carnivore diet is essentially like meat. I think butter is a lot. I think like eggs are a lot. It's like only animal products and like not even dairy, I don't think. And there's these claims that it has helped people reverse hormonal, like PCOS or their gut health or things like that. And like, there's a part of me that I'm like, I have been wrong on plenty of topics. And so I'm like, maybe there is some merit to this diet. But like anything, right? It's like this new thing that like, now this diet's going to fix whatever issues you're having. And it's always some extreme, right? Where it's like this big, sexy, like, it fixed all my problems and buy my guide so it'll fix yours too. And then, a few years down the line, we learn, oh yeah, like maybe this diet does have some merit to fixing some things, but long term, right, it doesn't stick. It doesn't work. That one right now is the one that I'm just like, I don't get it. I'm confused by it and I probably need to learn more about it.
That's so interesting that they're claiming that it causes some hormonal balances, and they mention PCOS because the PCOS diet, it does include protein, but it's more so lean proteins with more of a focus on like whole grains, right? Like, because that was one of the things when I was going through my weight loss, I had to eat the PCOS diet essentially, which really isn't anything other than just like getting the amount of protein that like your body needs, a lean protein, and then like whole grains and obviously like fruits and vegetables. So like a normal diet.
Yep. Yeah. And it's insane how often, like, I always come back to that same conclusion. I'm like, oh, so a healthy, balanced diet. Okay, cool. Like, got it.
What are your thoughts on popular diets? And specifically, I see a lot of like keto. Me personally, I tried to do intermittent fasting. It sucked for me. It didn't work for me. And it kind of actually like led into disordered eating. And I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but to me, I feel like elimination diets like intermittent fasting is kind of just harboring a little safe space for disordered eating. Can you explain like maybe how you feel about certain diets like those?
There are certain diets that have the name, that have their place. My training in integrative and functional nutrition taught me a lot about a lot of these different kind of fad diets and where they have their place and where they don't. A lot of these, especially keto, intermittent fasting, some of those elimination diets like low FODMAP is another one that people will do for like IBS type, like gut distress issues. I view a lot of those types of diets as a short-term treatment that long-term we have to then move out of and find kind of that maintenance plan. Something like keto, it was originally created, and this is where like science is always evolving. So it was originally discovered for children with epilepsy that when they eat a very high fat diet, low protein, low carbohydrates, they produce ketones. And when their brain uses ketones as fuel, for some reason it stops seizures from happening, which is fascinating. When I was in school and I learned that, I was like, what? That's insane. And like, what a cool discovery. These children would stay on it, I think, for anywhere from like 2 to 5 years. And then they could slowly transition back to just a regular healthy diet, and their seizures would generally stay in remission. And then, of course, as things happen with nutrition, people get a hold of this information, they apply it to different scenarios, and it becomes more popular. And there is more research now with keto that it can help with like type 2 diabetes, with just getting insulin resistance back under control, right? It's a very low carb diet. And so by changing the fuel the body runs on from carbohydrates to ketones, like, yeah, of course that's going to have metabolic changes. But again, right, any of these things are not, they're, in my professional opinion, they are not meant to be used long term because a lot of them are missing key nutrients. And at the end of the day, long term, our body needs fiber, it needs carbohydrates, it needs healthy fats and protein and all of these things in a balanced diet to function optimally long term. That's something that when I am looking at, what is the best plan for a particular patient, I look at what are the things that we're trying to treat? What is this person's capacity to adhere to dietary recommendations? And then, depending on the diet, like close follow-up, like every 2 weeks or once a month or something. Because Kaylee, like you mentioned, the line between elimination diet or intermittent fasting or something like that and disordered eating, they're really close. And I see a lot of people that did some sort of specific diet and now do display disordered eating behaviors. It's really important to counsel on that as well, that we're going to try this. Please know that the foods that we're eliminating are not bad foods. They are not unhealthy foods, right? We are eliminating them for this specific purpose, and our goal is to add them back in, right? So they're not gone forever. They're not bad. You're not bad for wanting them or liking them, right? We're doing this for a specific purpose. And usually, for most people, where we end up landing is right back to a balanced diet with mostly whole foods. That's usually the end point that we get to.
Is this kind of like a calories in, calories out type?
At the end of the day, like, calories in, calories out is important, but I also am a huge advocate for the quality of your food and not just the quantity that's going in.
I love that answer. Are there any specific genetic factors that predispose someone to struggle with weight management? When you have a patient, probably look into their medical history, and is there anything that you're really looking for that would predispose them to being obese?
Yeah, so I think the genetic factor is, I think, largely still, like, the specifics, I think, are unknown as far as I understand. Where maybe genetics, or more so like epigenetics, which is kind of how lifestyle or certain events impact the expression of someone's genes, is really interesting in how that might affect weight management. There are genetic factors that impact someone's like weight set point, right? So like where their body really wants to stay and be comfortably at a certain weight, which is sometimes different than where a person just wants to be because of appearance or body weight, shape, or size, or anything like that. Genetic factors might influence their metabolic rate, right, or how many calories that they burn or need in a given day. And then also things that might impact actually how many calories they absorb from the food that they're eating. And like the gut microbiome comes into play there. These things go back the health of their mother when they were in the womb, right? Did their mother go through a traumatic experience that changed the baby's brain chemistry that impacts how they now process life, right? And how that impacts their eating choices. If a mother was overweight or underweight, that can impact how then the baby, how their insulin works, their propensity to store fat. If your genetic lineage or your heritage, or however you want to say it, if there was a famine and those people's bodies became really good at fat storage and like, hey, we got to keep all this on board that for the next time there's a famine, there might be some kind of genetic trickling down that stays with you. So your body might be way better at storing fat at lower calories. I think it's called like the thrifty genotype or something. So like your body becomes very efficient at storing fat at lower calories, which is really great for survival. It's really shitty in our like current foodscape.
Oh my God. My mind is blown right now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So there is a lot that goes into it. Whether you go through a cesarean section or a vaginal birth impacts your microbiome, because there is a microbiome like in the vaginal canal that the baby ingests during birth that then influences their gut microbiome. Formula fed versus breastfed. Things that are completely out of someone's control impact their metabolism and the way that they might store or release calories.
That's so interesting. What hormonal issues do you commonly see that interfere with weight loss?
The things that I commonly see, right? Insulin resistance, which I think we've kind of covered. Thyroid issues are another big one. So specifically hypothyroid. And then changes in what we call the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So that influences things like your thyroid, your stress hormones. So that might result in diseases like PCOS. Cushing's, which is a lot less common, it has to do with having like really high levels of cortisol. When cortisol is released, it's really hard to also burn fat in that stress hormone. Cortisol is something that raises blood sugar, and that whole process puts us in a non-fat releasing or non-fat burning state. I don't know a ton about Cushing's. I've never actually seen it, but I know that it exists. Like I said, hypothyroid, which just overall kind of decreases metabolism. And then metabolic syndrome, which is kind of a culmination of things like insulin resistance, being overweight or obese, having high, blood lipid levels, which then kind of becomes this vicious circle of kind of like what we've discussed, where it's like someone is obese, someone has insulin resistance, their hunger, fullness cues are disrupted. And it just kind of reinforces that cycle.
And then how would someone go about knowing that they have these hormonal imbalances? Do you get blood work done and then a dietitian looks over that blood work?
Yep, exactly. So there are certain blood tests you can do. You can test for, insulin resistance, right? The test for that is going to be your A1C, or your blood sugar measured over an average of about 3 months. There's other tests you can do for insulin resistance that aren't commonly ordered, but I think can be requested. We can test for thyroid function. That's done pretty commonly. Metabolic syndrome is literally diagnosed through labs. And then other specific things, like if somebody wanted to test like their leptin or ghrelin, which is their hunger or fullness hormone, I think those can be tested for as well. They're just not routinely done. So definitely things you can do. And then also just symptom based. If you match the profile of a certain lab or hormone abnormality, we can move forward with treating that based on symptoms. Most of these labs do have to be ordered by a physician and then treated by the physician and also then by their interdisciplinary team.
So when we were talking to Georgie mentioned that she used to...
I don't know if you know this, but I was a competitive equestrian for 13 years. I rode horses at like a very high level and loved it. And I was very good. But to win is to be thin in that world. So I just didn't eat.
Oh, that's horrible. I didn't know that there was a show class that involved like judging someone's body. That's awful, especially for children. My God. There is some bullying. I don't see it so much in the community I'm in, but there is definitely some bullying around, like if there is an overweight person riding a horse, people are like, oh, well, you'd ride better, right, if you just lost the weight. And it's like, well, you can be strong and fit and also overweight, right?
I think teenage girls, like when Georgie was talking to me about it and she was saying like, yeah, this happened when I was like 13, 14 years old. I kind of looked back and like I was a cheerleader. So I was like, man, when did my disordered eating, like it's when I got into sports, and your body's kind of on display and it just, you can jump higher if you're thinner. And
well, even like I'm a very average runner, right? But in the running community, there's also, right, this kind of belief that if you're thinner, you can run faster. As we learn more about kind of human performance, humans perform better when they're fueled and strong. And so there's this really like palpable shift, I think, in the athletic community, especially as people kind of our generation are growing up and being like, fuck being skinny. Like, this is miserable. I can be 15 pounds heavier than what the world tells me I should be. And suddenly you've got energy. You can put effort forth towards the things that matter to you. And that's really important. And I think, a lot of the messaging that, we all heard growing up about, girls shouldn't be more than 120 pounds or 1,200 calories a day or all this bullshit, it sticks with us into our adult life. And as our bodies change, as we grow hips and we get fat in places that we're told that we shouldn't, right? We think that this is wrong and this shouldn't be happening. And I think, that fuels a lot of things. And learning more about just where the female body specifically likes to sit and the amount of weight that it needs or the amount of fat that it needs to function properly with hormones, the menstrual cycle, right? And just general good performance. I mean, I even kind of had my own moments of, kind of a couple times where I would like eat a lot the day before and then I'd go for a run the next day and be like, wow, I feel fantastic. And after that happened a couple times, I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I ate a lot yesterday. And so then you start eating a little bit more and it's like, what? My freaking workouts are insane. Like, I'm actually getting stronger.
One time I was walking Lydia because I would also walk like miles every day, but I wasn't fueling my body. So I felt like I was going to pass out and I had to immediately call Zach. And I was like, you need to come pick me up, because I was like, I'm going to pass out. And I've got my daughter just on the street in a stroller, and I could hear Zach like vroom around the corner, the tires squealing. And he like put me in the car, and I immediately called my doctor like, oh my God, what could possibly be wrong? I thought I had cancer. Couldn't possibly be because I was starving myself. And then I went, she had blood work done and she was like, you're starving yourself. So yeah, don't do that. What advice would you give to someone starting their weight loss journey?
The biggest thing I always tell people is like, go slow, go so slow. And as you're going slow, right, take the time to address all of the factors that maybe have contributed to when I say this, I'm not intending that this is like obesity is your fault, right? But address all the factors that maybe played into where you are now. Look at things beyond just food and exercise. Address your mental health. Look at improving your sleep. Sleep is a really underrated thing that heavily impacts appetite and cravings, right? So if you're not sleeping, you're not going to be as satiated and you're going to crave more processed kind of calorie dense foods. So address that, right? Don't have your sleep working against you. Do you have supportive relationships in your life? Are there people you can go to get support and that root for you and are there for you and want the best for you? Or are you working against yourself and the people in your life, right? That's contributing to more stress. Look at how you recharge throughout the day, right? Do you give yourself time to sit and enjoy and just kind of relax? Let your nervous system kind of come down from that fight or flight that we're all so often in. Have hobbies. Something that I see a lot is that people get so hyper-focused on weight loss and it's all they think about. And I think it's super important to have other things to do, whether that's like taking a hot girl walk, read a book. I'm a big fan of just like I love doing like sunset walks, right? Like as the sun is setting, let's go out, let's just enjoy all the colors and like the quietness. Call your mom, call a friend. So many things that people can have interest in that are going to be so important for taking your mind off of just all the changes that you're making and taking your mind off of wanting to kind of monitor it all the time. So that's kind of the big thing, right? Take it slow. And then on the side of mental health, I would highly recommend working on self-compassion because it's really hard to do things for a body that you are also actively hating. So figuring out a way to, like, you don't have to go from hating the body you're in to loving the body you're in, but find a way to at least be neutral towards it and maybe work on, how can you find that love for yourself? Because it really impacts when you're battling against your body, that's going to impact the way you talk to yourself. That's going to impact then the level of stress that you have. So find a way to feel kind of safe in your own body again. And then the last thing is consistency. And that is something that I also see a lot of people struggle with is like commit to being there for your body. Eat consistently throughout the day. Eat well consistently. Treat yourself consistently. Move consistently. Focus on your mental health, right? All of that really just requires that repeated effort day in and day out. And that is really where I see people be successful.
I love it. Are there any resources or tools you recommend for those looking to learn more about weight?
The biggest resource I would say if you're starting a weight loss journey is to pick up the book Intuitive Eating. It's by Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribble. It is a great book that doesn't use diet culture recommendations, right? So they really look at getting more in tune with your body, kind of addressing like, why do you want to lose weight? Why are you unhappy in your body? Why have diets failed you in the past? And really, so there's a book and then there's also a workbook that goes along with it. So I would definitely recommend picking those up. It just has a lot of great insight on the sustainability or kind of lack thereof with diets and moving towards more of those kind of long-term habit changes that eventually do result in weight loss. The other thing that I would really look into gaining as a skill is mindful eating. And that doesn't have like a specific book or website. If you just Google it, there's a lot of great resources. Basically looks at like the way in which you eat. And again, like how you think through choosing what to eat, how you eat, what you think about after your meal. It goes right alongside mindfulness, which is being in the present, like non-judgmental kind of curiosity about your thoughts. And it takes that kind of approach into our eating patterns. So again, getting rid of that shame around our eating and just making choices based on what feels good. And then I would also really recommend, right, for folks that are on social media, which is most of us, find people to follow, whether it's dietitians that are kind of anti-diet culture that really promote a balanced and sustainable approach to weight management. Follow people that have your same body shape, body type, and use them as an inspiration versus people that don't have that. And, that kind of leads you to believe that maybe your body shape is wrong and their body shape is right. So the more you can kind of surround yourself with folks that look like you and move the way that you want to and eat the way that you want to and kind of promote that healthier approach, I would highly recommend that as well.
Wow. Well, if anybody knows any influencers who have no ass, looking to follow them. Okay. And then our last question is, what do you love most about your job?
A lot of things. I think what I really love is like simplifying nutrition for people. So really kind of moving away from diet culture and moving away from, like, a lot of people, if they come see a dietitian for the first time, they're really expecting to be told that they can't have cake. They can't have a little dessert a few times a week, right? They can't eat fast food anymore. And I really loved helping people take a more sustainable approach and just helping people really rethink the way that they see being healthy and what does that actually mean. And it's so gratifying when I see people kind of actively make that shift in mindset. And then, say I'm following them for a couple of years and it's like just the immense shift in mindset and the way that they approach health. And I love being able to influence that.
Well, thank you, Molly. When it comes to obesity, I wish that I would have had somebody like you to say, like, hey, it's not your fault, but there are solutions. Like, there's a way out. Let's stop the blaming and hating yourself and focus straight on the solutions and what those are.
Happy to spread the good nutrition juju.
Thank you so much, Molly, for joining us and for sharing your time with us and all of your experience. And a special thank you to all of our listeners. Every single one of you matters so much to us. So please feel free to reach out. We are more than happy to have conversations about topics, to answer questions. If you have ideas for us, let us know. Message us on Instagram. Give us a follow on TikTok. We're also on Substack. Kaylee has been writing and releasing incredible articles. So if you really want to get to know us and support us, that is also a really great outlet. Be sure to join us next week. Kaylee is diving deep in her interview with Georgie, who is on her own weight loss journey and so far has lost 70 pounds. So we will see you next week right here on Sorry I'm a Bitch.